Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm Roman Zelichenko, your host, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur, and the current. Uh, hey, sorry, guys. I had a little issue here with the live stream. Okay, great. Let's start over. Welcome, everybody, to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. Super excited to be here. Former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur and the founder of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also GMI Rocket, which is a marketing agency for the immigration industry, and of course, which brings you this show. Today, we're on episode 102. Again, when we got to 100, I was like, holy cow, how did this happen? Today, we're at 102. Our guest today is Kim Humphreys, who is the CEO of a company called BYD Cash, which BYD stands for Build Your Dreams. So BYDcash, in short, is an organization that helps individuals who are kind of going through the immigration process be able to, take out loans to help them pay for their immigration applications, their legal fees, their, filing fees, et cetera. Effectively, it makes immigration accessible, from a financial standpoint, and so much more. And I'm really excited to talk to Kim about, number one, her journey to coming here. She has an incredible and really interesting career in the financial and fintech space, eventually settling into this intersection of finance or fintech and immigration. But then also just to learn about the company, how do they assess individuals and give out loans to, where these individuals maybe don't have a credit score or, don't have the typical things that institutions usually look for when they give out loans. So super excited for that. Before we bring on Kim, I just wanted to say thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, Lex Reception. So if you're a longtime listener, Lex Reception has been supporting the show for a little while, and I'm grateful to them. If you've never heard of them, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service. They answer phone calls and messages in real time. They schedule appointments for your law firm, and they provide immigration law firms generally with 24/7 kind of legal answering specialists. So you as a firm, you don't have to worry about, missing phone calls from potential clients or existing clients, missing inquiries on, your email form, your reach out to me form, et cetera. They can even proactively reach out to folks who've, let's say, filled out an inquiry and you don't have time to follow up with them so that you don't lose them out as a potential client. You can have the team at Lex Reception do that for you. They have tech integrations with all sorts of platforms that immigration lawyers use: Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and others. And of course, for listening to the show, you get $250 off your first month of service with them. So if you've got a busy firm, you're missing phone calls, you're missing emails from prospective clients, check out Lex Reception, link in the show notes, or just reach out to them and say you heard about them here, and they will hook you up. All right, Kim, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have this conversation and learn about what you're doing. A little bit different from the usual, kind of immigration tech startups that do immigration forms or case management, but, arguably just as, if not more important, because, finance, somebody has to pay for the legal bill, right? And the filing fees. And if they can't pay, there is no immigration process. So I'm really excited to dive into your story.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so as as we talked about, and folks know, I like to go back in time, and kind of learn more about the person. I take you as an entrepreneurial type. I know this isn't your first venture, but for myself, I had business ideas when I was younger. Mostly like in college, I really had a couple that I thought were nothing crazy, but at least something I could have done. I never went for it though. So I'm curious, kind of when you were growing up, as a kid, were you kind of like the lemonade stand, kid, paper route kid, where you sort of think, or were you just, studying and school and not thinking about, oh, I can make my own money and do my own business as a kid?
I was definitely not the lemonade stand kid. I'm the oldest of six, and I was busy running around chasing after my siblings. So I would say my youngest brother was selling candy to his friends at school, but I didn't even think anything of that at the time.
Interesting. Wow. So you're more like a project manager.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
Which, to be fair, it's the youngest or the oldest of six is it's a big. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Orleans.
New
So
Orleans.
lived
Wow.
there until college. So I grew up in New Orleans.
What was it like growing? I love New Orleans. Of course, I love jazz and food and everything. I was there just recently for a NAFSA conference, the sort of higher ed immigration conference. Beautiful city, really busy, obviously in the center, but gorgeous on the outside. Like the suburban areas. What was it like being there as a
Well,
kid?
it's a great city, and people always think of the French Quarter and things like that.
Right.
But New Orleans is a very multi-generational city, and so you've got like very close families, and you're friends for life, and it's still such a great city. And I still have a lot of family there, so I go back pretty often too. But right now, the humidity is worse than for you in New York and me in Atlanta and Florida. So,
Do you feel like I take cities like, I'm from New York, where it's hard to pinpoint a particular industry that, is the overarching industry in New York. Yes, there's a lot of financial services providers. There are a lot of, maybe big international law firms, but there's everything here, right? Every industry. What industry do you think, maybe there was no influence, but do you think influenced sort of the culture in New Orleans, sort of as a teen, in high school, et cetera? If
right.
there was
It's really interesting because New Orleans is definitely a tourist economy, and then it's really service and a lot of family-owned businesses, but mostly tourism drove a lot of it. There were, when I was growing up, I think one Fortune 500 company there, and that's still the case. Um, but after Katrina, there were a lot of people who moved back who really wanted to see the city survive. And in
Wow.
fact, a friend of mine started an incubator down there called the Idea Village, which is really interesting. And they help promote entrepreneurship and help individuals get going. So there's been a lot of activity there. I actually just snagged a fantastic marketing person from the Idea Village who's joined BYDcash. We just now brought in a marketing person, and she's in New Orleans. She's wonderful. But it's
Wow.
the city has evolved. It's got a lot more technology now than it used to. A lot of that now is in the entertainment industry and film and music.
Yeah, I mean, which feels like it makes sense. I mean, the music scene obviously is not only historic, but continues to flourish
Mhm.
in New Orleans. And also, I love that. I mean, I love that people saw, if they moved away and then saw this sort of, the devastation of Katrina, to say, you know what, I'm going to move back and invest in my home, and sort of make sure that New Orleans survives or comes out of it better, stronger on the other side. That's very inspiring. That's cool. So okay, and then you, after sort of high school, you went to University of Alabama. So you kind of, is there any reason that you went there? I mean, maybe particular major or family or something.
Well, I was looking at a few schools, and I looked at Tulane, and then my father said, "Great, you can live at home." So I said, "Well, never mind. I'm going to go to Alabama." And I went to a very small school. We had 60 people in my high school class, and 6 of us went to Alabama. So I guess that was the school of the year. And so went there, loved it. It was fantastic. And then from there, got my first job out of college in Atlanta and moved to Atlanta. And I actually thought I'd be there a couple of years and then head to New York, but still there.
Can you talk about that first job?
The first job, I was a
Yeah,
magazine editor. So I
yeah.
started out as a magazine editor working in business publications, and I loved it. And as you know very well with your podcast, you get to interview so many interesting people and learn about any topic that you want, really. And so that was one of the things that I absolutely loved about it. However, as a magazine editor, and certainly a young, right out of college magazine editor, I was still calling my father for supplemental income every month while he had 5 others in college. So
Mm.
I knew that wasn't going to last for very long. And so I flipped sides into marketing, and that's kind of how I eased ultimately into technology.
Yeah, being an editor, I with GMI Rocket, what we do for our clients is kind of content writing and things like that. And I used to be the one doing all the writing, and then eventually, thankfully, I had more clients who were interested, and so I hired some writers, and I became the editor. And it's such an interesting role. I can't imagine were you a writer at all in college or for this magazine, or did you come in as an editor?
No, I've always been a writer too.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So they must have said, you have to show that you know how to write in order to know how to edit, of course, I'm sure. But it was personally, it was just an interesting transition to go from, it is hard to be a writer. I think it's harder to be a writer than an editor, because a writer looks at a blank screen. You have to create something out of nothing. It's almost, for lack of a better term, entrepreneurial, right? You have an idea and you have to turn it into a thing that exists in the world. And you're looking at a blank sheet of paper, and that's that 0 to 1 step. Editing is so easy. Everyone has an opinion about, what someone else has already done. The challenge is being the one who does it. So I found that my experience sort of as a writer turned editor was, in hindsight, and even just thinking about it right now, useful to me as an entrepreneur, in terms of like the confidence that I can go take an idea and turn it into something out of nothing. And then also the editor part, take someone else's idea and give them feedback on it and hopefully make it better. I don't know if you've had a similar experience. I'm sort of coming to this now as we're talking.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, I think writing is hard. It's definitely hard, but editing is not easy because, you've got a lot on the page, and really editing is cutting out a lot, right? And really driving the direction. And a lot of times, there are so many different directions that could go in, and you have to sacrifice some to keep the content moving in a certain direction. And so, it's not always easy to edit, but it is very similar to entrepreneurship. So for example, with me, with my businesses, and this, when you start a business, there are a million opportunities, right? We can do this and that, and there's, shiny objects all around you, and you really got to stay focused. And so that's similar to editing, right? You've got to not pay attention to all the shiny objects and really stay focused on what was the original mission, assuming that mission is working. And then as you progress, then you can start to evaluate some of those other opportunities. But that's really the hard part, I think, because if you're an entrepreneur, you're pretty open-minded and optimistic. Right. And so everything looks good. So right. Really staying focused is a skill.
Everything looks good, and you think you can make everything work.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly.
And so you don't know what to choose. That's fascinating. And so you moved over to the marketing side, and I know this is where you, as you said, you kind of leveraged that move into marketing, kind of inadvertently, I suppose. I don't know if you were thinking about wanting to work in the technology space, but you entered the tech space. So this was the job that you got at Secured First Network Bank?
Yeah, so it was actually before the bank even had a name. It was, they were looking at it. I actually ended up knowing the individuals involved, and they were looking at starting something on the internet. And we didn't even know really what the internet was at that time, right? They had seen 1-800-Flower selling flowers on the internet, and they had a company that was built out of the ATDC, which is an incubator at Georgia Tech. And it was deep kernel security technology for operating systems. I didn't have a clue what any of that was, and really didn't have an interest in any of that either. But they were starting a business on the internet, and I had to look up, what is the internet and what is encryption and what are these things? But it sounded interesting, and it was a good group of people. And so I jumped in with both feet, and quickly we created the world's first internet bank because we had that security technology, which we called the virtual vault. But it was a friend of mine who had the technology company, the security technology company. His brother-in-law was a banker. And so they came together and we created this, the world's first internet bank. But that bank was really a proof of concept for the software behind it to sell to other banks. So we had several banks partner with us to build this, to test it out. And, within the first year, we had more than 10,000 customers of the bank across every continent. And really, those are early technology adopters, right? They really wanted to see what it was about. But we didn't have any branches. It was all online. It was a leap of faith for them and for us. But then within the next year or so, we had sold the technology to 50 of the world's largest banks. and we had partnered with 3 of the 4 top core processors, which are the businesses that provide all of the solutions for banks in the background. And so it took off, and we had one of the largest IPOs of the year. And, I didn't sleep for 2.5 years, but it was super exciting. It was really amazing.
Wow. And where was this based? This was S1 Corporation, right? Was that the name of the tech company?
And this was in Atlanta. And Atlanta's got a huge fintech presence. So, more than 3/4 of all the payments in the US, in the world, actually go through Atlanta companies. So it's a big fintech hub, although that word didn't exist back then.
I'm just curious because I know this was, kind of the mid to late 90s, before the stock market bubble burst, right? So this is when things were going up and to the right.
Right.
But I've seen a lot of documentaries. I was young at the time, kind of too young. I guess we had, I don't know if I remember in 1990. Yeah, Y2K, pre-Y2K. We probably had a computer in the apartment. We had AOL, and so the internet was sort of, yeah, we had something, but I wasn't, I was a kid, so I wasn't paying attention to the industry per se. But all the documentaries I've seen about companies that were started around that time, most of them were based out of California, and they were like the original startups. I mean, people wearing T-shirts and flip-flops to work, and kind of the startup office. Was it a similar culture for you in Atlanta, or was it more kind of straight-laced?
No, it was an interesting dichotomy because we had the T-shirts, ripped jeans, pizza boxes stacked to the ceiling, and then we had the gray hair bankers in suits. So we had it all meshed together. So it was really interesting.
That's really fun. It's become the word startup, and that whole brand is so mainstream now, and it's still wonderful. I mean, I have a tech company of my own, although it's remote, so the office. But it's really cool to think about how that office culture, it wasn't trying to be cool. It just was like that was the natural thing to do at the time, right? I mean, now when startups have ping pong tables and such, they're trying to do that because it signals something to employees. We're flexible, we're cool, whatever it is. Back then, there was no precedent for it. This was just, we have no time to think about, or money to think about office space. Come in as you are. Well, you want pizza? Great. You want to work at 11 a.m. to midnight? Great. We don't care. As long as you get the work done. So I don't know. I think that's it's amazing that you were part of that, had that experience before it was cool, I guess.
Well, you're exactly right. There was no plan around that, but you
Right.
literally worked around the clock. I mean, at that time, we worked around the clock for literally about 2.5 years. So for me, I was talking to publications in Japan and Italy and wherever. So I was, phone calls all night and morning. So literally, I don't think I slept for 2 years.
Wow. Well, good thing we have HR now.
Yes.
So you, by the way, for folks who are watching or listening live, please chime in with any questions for Kim, or I suppose for myself, about this. Super interesting. Okay. So after that, so the company went public. I guess you stayed on for a little bit after the IPO and continued to work there.
I did. I was there for about 3 years, and then I left to take a little bit of a break. And then I went to another startup so that company really served financial institutions around the world. I went to another startup that did the same kind of thing, but for community banks and credit unions. So at the smaller end of the spectrum, also out of Atlanta. And that was another group of Georgia Tech folks. These were young, just out graduating students that were starting this. And did that, and that was pretty interesting too. A completely different audience, if you will.
What year was that, if you remember, approximately?
That was about 98, 99.
Got it. So it was before the bubble burst, and so were they funded? I mean, did they get venture funding? Yeah,
and they did well, and the company was acquired. So yeah,
wild days.
Yes.
So were you working in technology at either that company or after that, when 2000, 2001? when kind of the stock market crashed from a tech
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. Well, actually, I had gone out on my own then and did consulting and had quite a few clients, and yeah, that was an interesting time. So I still was able to kind of make it through that, but it was, a lot of clients didn't. So.
What was it like consulting during that time? I mean, I'm assuming at first things were still peachy, and so people wanted your expertise on growth and maybe acquisition strategy. But as things unraveled and companies started to go bankrupt or close shop, were people contacting you to say basically, how do we stay afloat? Like, how do we survive this?
There was some of that, but then those are the times that also breed new innovation, right? And that was a tough time, but there were others that were, I was very close to the startup ecosystem. And so there were others really looking at new ideas. Honestly, that was so long ago, I can't remember too much about them, but
Yeah,
some of the existing clients went away, some new ones came in with starting some new things. And, funding was incredibly difficult then, but sometimes funding can hamper innovation.
right.
And so it really did breed some new types of innovation during that period.
Yeah, I mean, you hear same thing happened post 2008. There were a number of companies that started. Yes, they couldn't raise money very easily. To your point, probably a good thing. But so many companies sort of saw reflected on what happened in the world in 2008, and maybe not necessarily financially, but like from a financial system standpoint, but just a lot of these gig economy companies started in 2008. Why? Because people needed ways to make extra money, right? When so many lost their homes, when so many when like lost their 401ks, I mean, you name it. And those companies still exist, right? I mean, you have your Airbnbs, you have your car sharing apps or ride sharing apps, etc.
All of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. I think at the time it's really easy to get down on oneself, but then with the beauty of hindsight, you see the cycles kind of ebb and flow, which is really cool. So you made it through that time. You were a consultant, etc. And then I guess you stayed in the financial space for the rest of your career up until you started, your next company. But
I kind of jumped back into magazine for a little bit after that downturn, and I was editor of 2 business publications, one for Fortune 1000 companies and one for high growth entrepreneurs. And like I mentioned, that was really, really fun because I got to set the direction of the content and meet anyone I wanted. And in Atlanta, we have lots of Fortune 500 companies. So, Coke, UPS, and many, many others. Those folks, I would have an event every month for the Fortune 500 and an event for the entrepreneurs. So I had, the CEO of UPS speaking, or I had, the next hot startup, and lots of EO members, if you're familiar with EO and YPO and others, and really interesting people that, had a lot of information to share with our audience. And, I got to learn a lot from them, which was incredibly helpful.
Can you share, just as maybe a small aside, but with this podcast, I'm so grateful to be talking to you and the others who've been on the show. I have found it to be some of the most, impactful conversations I've had for myself as a founder. I learn, not only am I inspired by stories like yours, but I learned so much, right? I know that at least some folks who watch or listen to this show are founders in the immigration industry or global mobility, hopefully even outside of this industry. Can you I would love to hear your thoughts as someone who's one of few people who's sort of done both, right? You've worked in the tech and entrepreneurship space, and then you've also sort of been on the networking side, if you will, through the magazine, putting together events. Can you if you were to articulate the benefits of, you started your own business, for example, spending a little bit of time putting together a newsletter where you interview people or setting up events where you invite people. What are the benefits to an entrepreneur who is, in the beginning stages of their career to spend time and energy doing something like that, to get to know people who are more, experienced and who are maybe heavy hitters in the industry. I don't know. Could you articulate kind of what the values are?
Absolutely. Not only are you able to tell your story, but it's a great reason to reach out to people. Most people like to tell their story. And so giving them a forum to do that not only gets you in front of them, but then you really do get to learn a lot from them. And that was one of the greatest gifts to me in my career, is to be able to talk to the Fortune 1000 and the startups and everything in between. And, a lot of times, at least in the companies that I've been involved with, we're selling into that Fortune 1000, or used to be. And so understanding them and their perspective made it easier for us to present whatever the solution was to them, understanding how to speak their language and what was important to them. So I think understanding your audience, that gives you an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I love I agree that people love sharing their story, and I think I found that people are more agreeable than others might think. Like, I've had a lot of folks say, "Oh, well, I don't know if that person will respond to me, or will they come onto my show?" And I said, "Look, if you approach them from the perspective of people would love to learn from you. Yes, they'll sit down for a quick interview, or answer some questions for your article, your blog post or your newsletter." I think younger entrepreneurs, and I say this, I'm sort of talking to myself maybe 6 or 7 years ago when I first started, or 8 years ago. I was nervous, understandably. These are people. And then now I'm that person sometimes that people, and I don't feel that way. I feel like exactly the same person I was, when I first started and didn't know anything or anybody. I think it's easy to forget the humanity of, the industry, and to focus on titles, CEO, or, oh, you've raised millions of dollars, therefore you have no time for me. I think most people will have time for someone if they know that the time that they spend will, educate somebody, or will give somebody an example or inspiration.
I think you're exactly right. We're all inundated with sales calls and sales pitches and all of that. That doesn't, people don't have time for that unless it's something they really need. But if you're genuinely interested, you want to learn, or you have an opportunity to share someone's story, I think most people are open to that if they can. And, time is difficult sometimes, but I think most people are more than open to sharing and trying to help others.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for the aside. I'm passionate about this because I love doing this show. I'm grateful. I think the thing that I'll end on this note, I've built 2 businesses. I'm really proud of them. I love them. But I think the thing I'm most amazed by, just from my own journey so far, is I go on the YouTube channel for the show, and I'll scroll down, and your faces, and I look at everyone's face, and I think to myself, I can't believe all of these people gave me, an hour of their time. It's like, to me, time is the most valuable, precious commodity that we have. And they were willing to give that to me. That's so much more valuable to me than, an invoice, right, from a client, in a sense. I'm not saying I don't want to get paid by my clients. So if you're listening, please continue. But anyway, so, okay. So
you gave us the improv, so you pay it back in spades.
That's fair. Fair enough. You give me your story and I'll do a comedy show.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to jump into, kind of your next sort of entrepreneurial endeavor. If I'm not mistaken here, you started, and I'm also looking at your LinkedIn profile. You started you came from this fintech space, right? Both Fortune 500s, and then you said sort of on the smaller scale, you did consulting. You've gone through IPOs, you've gone through fundraising. So now I'm assuming at some point you either had your own idea or you felt, I've seen this done. Let me be a founder or a co-founder of a company.
I've done a number of startups, but always with other partners. So after that, there was a company that I went to that was already started, but they had raised a lot of money right before the bust, right? and then rolled up those companies into one operating company. Some of them got shuttered and some rolled up. I went there, and there we started a business that did electronic invoice presentment and payment and electronic billing. So B2B and B2C. So when you pay your electric bill online, that was us making that system so that you can go pay your bill online. When we started the first internet bank, we did bill payment, and we thought everyone would set up their bank account and their bill pay. They would pay all their bills out of their checking account online. That didn't happen. People went to their electric company and paid their bill there, and they went to their credit card company and paid their bill there. So this company did that, both for consumers, paying your electric bill online, and then for businesses. So for example, we had a client there that would send invoices out on a pallet, and then those pieces of papers had to get parsed, sent around to all the offices around the world, get checked, get approved, then payments cut, from various departments. And that would take forever and be very expensive. So we did all of that digitally. And so those invoices were electronic and the payments were electronic. So it could go through the process a lot faster, save money for both parties, the buyer and the seller. And then that company was ultimately acquired by American Express. So American Express at the time was really trying to build their business to business activities. And so they purchased that company. I went there and I stayed there for about 3 or 4 years, and then was really ready to do another startup.
And this was Harbor Payments?
That was Harbor.
That's Harbor Payments. Mm-hmm. Were you just thinking about the time of the years or that you well, even from your first company, did you have any interactions with sort of what they now call the PayPal mafia? The X.com, well, the original X.com, and then what became PayPal, because they were also sort of at the forefront of digital payments. I think they were doing more kind of peer-to-peer payments rather than the B2B. But was there ever any intermingling or overlapping there?
Not really so much there, because that was more P2P, and we were really focused on businesses and banks and then credit cards, et cetera. But so there wasn't a whole lot of cross-pollination there, if you will.
Well, I guess you and Elon Musk are cut off the same cloth from a business standpoint. Yeah, because that's like those organizations have like all the founders from the PayPal, eBay, X.com. They've all gone on to start multiple billion-dollar companies, and some in the payment space and some not. And so I feel like you guys are parallel, but coming from the Atlanta side, it definitely makes sense that you were doing more institutional banking, which frankly, you look at organizations like Stripe now, which is really kind of one of the leaders in international banking. I know Forex is one of their kind of primary value adds, as far as I understand, but an unbelievable also organization. And you'd think we solved payments a long time ago, but it's still a pain point. It's still very, very complicated. With crypto, it's even more complicated now. How do you deal with that? So there's never a dull moment in the industry.
Oh,
I want to. So before we continue on, I just want to do a quick pause and just give a thank you to a tech company that is doing great things in the immigration space and is also a sponsor of the show, DocketWise. So for folks who are listening, who are immigration lawyers, I know, Kim, you're on the immigration finance side, but you're at the AILA conference. You must have seen DocketWise's massive, beautiful booth. They are a wonderful supporter of this show. For folks who do not know DocketWise, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform. So they have really great immigration form software, which is kind of how they started, more or less. Really customizable questionnaires to make it really easy for law firms to get the right information from their clients. Integrations with all sorts of apps, including Laborless, which I love. Great customer service. They do a really nice job creating content for the industry. So like we talked about, Kim, the value add of interviewing people or just generally creating something that is inspiring and informational to the industry. DocketWise does a great job. They've got a podcast, they've got a blog, they do ebooks. I mean, they're great. So for anyone who's listening, if you are an immigration attorney or an in-house team and you handle immigration cases, and you're looking for or would like to check out a new immigration case management platform, check out DocketWise. Again, their link is in the show notes, or just reach out to them and tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So thank you, DocketWise. Okay. I want to kind of get to your sort of, I think your last startup, or at least that you have publicly listed, which is NOW Corp. So it sounds like this is where you were part of the American Express buyout. You wanted to do another thing. I'm exhausted listening to this story because it's like startup after startup after startup, knowing how much work it is. So can you share a little bit about NOW Corp before we get to BYDcash? Just because I feel like it feels like you started moving in a slightly different direction, still within fintech, but not quite, banking specific.
That's right. So around that time when the banks were in trouble, right? And so Amex was kind of wondering, do they want to keep investing a lot of money in this piece of the business? We had several pieces that they acquired. And I was in a piece that we were looking at growing within Amex, but when the banks really got into trouble, they decided they wanted to shelve that. And so I thought, do I want to buy that from them and go back and do it on my own? Or do I want to do something different? And at the same time, I was starting something called FinTech, a group in Atlanta, to really showcase the amount of financial services tech. I'm sorry.
Oh boy.
Noise. Oh. I'm in a hotel right now. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
The payments industry really lives in Atlanta. And so we were working on a group to really help showcase that, and then look at developing educational programming within the universities there to help build a talent workforce for FinTech. And at the time, one of the folks that was helping to start this was starting another alternative finance business. He had a factoring company that worked with Synovus for small businesses. And again, when the banking dried up, that Synovus and many others stopped lending, and that business had to pivot. And so he was looking at how would we do this in a better way. So we started this business to help small businesses that sell to other businesses or government customers. And they could get the sale, but they couldn't fund the sale. So I would, buy the materials, build the widgets, send it to the customer, and then invoice them, and then wait 2-3 months to get paid. I couldn't afford to take the next sale. So what we did was create an alternative supplier finance program that allowed a business to select which customers, which invoices they wanted to get paid for right away. But unlike factoring, which might have a negative connotation sometimes, the customer didn't know anything about it. So as a small business, I could choose to get paid on this one invoice, and that would carry me through until I got paid for, the other invoices I had out. So I could keep growing my business. And so we really partnered with large companies that wanted to help their small and diverse suppliers grow, but wanted to make sure that they were financially stable and able to meet their needs. And so that's really how we kind of grew that business. It was a really powerful business, a really great idea. I had some very interesting partners, and we were able to help, create thousands of jobs at a time when people were laying people off. And, it was really very rewarding. But my partners didn't really want to take any equity at the time when we could. And so we bootstrapped for almost a decade. And you can only grow so much. And so at some point it was, I was tired of being poor and hungry and working all the time. So I thought it's time to go do something else. And that's really kind of when I made that pivot over to BYDcash.
So just before we get to BYDcash in earnest, the way I'm hearing you say that you partnered with large companies and you helped their suppliers get the financing that the suppliers needed in order to stay afloat. I mean, so the partners didn't need your financing. It's
Right.
their smaller suppliers that did, but these partners were basically saying, we like these suppliers. Our accounts payable process is such that it's 60 days upon delivery of the good or service. We can't change that, but we also understand that it makes it really difficult for our small partners to survive. So like through them, you got to your ultimate client, which was these small suppliers. Is that
That's
right?
exactly right. We didn't start out that way. So like with most startups, you have a plan of how you're going to go to market. And we went through chambers of commerce and other organizations that really aggregate small businesses. And that helped a little bit. We did get some clients that way, but it was a very slow, arduous process. So then we looked at, we're in Atlanta. We've got 15 or so of the Fortune 500 here. Let's talk to them. And so one example was Coca-Cola. We partnered with Coca-Cola. They didn't use our service, but they had an internal mandate to get to $1 billion by a certain time frame with their small and diverse suppliers. So they wanted to have that spend with diverse suppliers. They were also going from a net 60 to a net 90 payout to their suppliers. And they knew that would crush those really small suppliers that they had. So what they would do is host an event. We would come talk to them. Their suppliers would fly in from around the country to come learn about this because their biggest customer said, hey, we want to tell you about this. That's kind of how we went to market. And as a result, these small suppliers who could do the work, they just couldn't fund the sale for that long, were able to not only survive during that period, but really thrive and grow. And we had many of our clients that doubled, tripled their business in the first year because they had the ability to fund those sales.
How did you get in front of a Coca-Cola, as sort of the middle of the wheel with the spokes being your ultimate clients, but the hub? How did you get to Coca-Cola to have them even listen to you?
Right. Well, Atlanta's a big, small town.
Okay.
And so, I had contacts from the magazines. My partners had contacts from their previous experience or nonprofit or civic work. And so we had a lot of different ways to get to different folks. And the value proposition was compelling. So we were able to get to MARTA, for example, and offer it to their suppliers, which is MARTA is the rapid transit in Atlanta.
Gotcha.
So a government entity. We also worked through Invest Atlanta, which, through the chambers and through, the cities organizations, we were able to get to a lot of the right people to help foster this. And the idea is to create jobs, and they all wanted to help do that. So that was a big way that we ended up going to market.
Wow. And just from a business model standpoint, I'm assuming these were loans just with some interest and payback period and like standard.
It wasn't a loan. The way that worked was actually more like a credit card. So the supplier would, send the product and send the invoice. The customer would wait, 90 days to pay. So based on the terms of the invoice, we had a flat fee. So we would pay the supplier immediately for that invoice. And if it was a net 30, it was, I think, 2.5%, a net 60, it was 2.75, and 90, it was a 3% flat fee on the invoice. The customer still got the invoice. They still paid the supplier on their own time frame, but they sent it to a lockbox that we controlled. So the supplier still looked financially viable and strong, and was able to take the next order. nothing changed for the customer. And that was the whole point. The customer was not going to change their behavior. So how could we fix that? They were never going to offer a credit card.
Right.
But it felt like they had offered a credit card. That's how it felt to the supplier.
That's brilliant.
It was I had some very smart partners, and, they far smarter than me, and who came up with this. It was really a very interesting model.
Yeah, and I love that, because it requires you to understand not just the gap in the market, but also the nuanced sort of psychology of all the players, right? Understanding that the small customer, the small suppliers, they have this desire to grow, but then because of corporate payable structures, they're not going to get their money for 60 to 90 days. But their suppliers, so let's say they make a can of soda, some specialty drink that Coca-Cola buys, they've got a glass manufacturer that, needs to get paid upon, delivery of the glass. They've got someone to print the labels. They have people who, their sugar supplier. I mean, things like that. You can't tell them, well, listen, Coca-Cola is not paying me for 90 days. I can't pay you for 90 days. That company's going to say, all right, well, we'll sell someone else our glass bottles. And
yeah, that was actually the beauty of it, because that same dollar goes through the supply chain through multiple players. So that became a viral distribution channel for us. So now you're creating the syrup, but somebody else is doing the bottle, and then somebody else is printing the label. Now we've got all of them. Everybody's getting paid faster along the chain. Yeah. And so they're all able to grow together. So that really ended up being a great, very viral distribution model.
That's really cool. And then, of course, ultimately, you do have the I guess the security that the ultimate buyer is a multinational entity, and like they're good for their money, effectively.
Right. They're slow, but they're going to pay.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. I love that. So I wanted, first of all, I find it fascinating, and I love digging into sort of non-legal industries. But I wanted to ask you those questions because, moving on to BYDcash, it's kind of a similar model. Right. I mean, the law firm is kind of the hub. Their clients are the spokes, if you will. They're the suppliers, for lack of a better term, in the sense that they're the ones that need the financial resources. I mean, obviously, the transaction is a different direction, but the point is you have this, the law firm dictates the, kind of how they get paid, how much they get paid, et cetera. And then the individual that needs, their visa application filed and paid for, they're the ones who, may need financial support. And so, obviously I know you go to immigration law conferences, and so that's not where the individuals are, that's where the lawyers are. So to use that analogy, that's where like the Coca-Colas are, right? With respect to your prior company. So can you talk a little bit about how did you pivot from, selling to these big corps in Atlanta and doing this sort of, this sort of financing organization to thinking about immigrants and immigration and how, to support individuals who need financial assistance to get their applications filed?
Well, that's exactly right. So my partners and I were looking at what do we want to do next? And really, we started to look at trade between India and the US, and is there a way to finance that activity? But during that time, we met a gentleman, an attorney from Mexico. He had actually represented Mexico during the BP oil spill. His brother was an immigration attorney. And so he was looking at creating an app that would simplify immigration, which of course to us, we didn't know anything about immigration. We thought, wow, that sounds great. Now looking back, it's, a little entertaining because immigration is so complex. But the concept was good. It was, how do we aggregate all of the individuals that need to go through the immigration process, collect that intake information, figure out what they need, have standardized pricing, and then partner on the back end with law firms to provide that service and really kind of expedite the process. So we thought, well, that sounds pretty interesting. And, maybe we could finance those transactions. And so that's really kind of how we got into this. And as we started learning more about immigration, the idea was, well, there's going to be reform and there's going to be all this activity and these things are going to happen. Well, that stuff didn't happen. And so we thought, well, but it still looks pretty interesting. It looks like there is a need here. And I was very fortunate. I've got some friends that I was talking to. They are a retired couple. He ran CNN Latin America, and she ran the Latin American Association. They introduced me to Chuck Cook of Cook Baxter, and that really helped move this forward. So he really validated that there is a need in the market for this, and was very gracious in sharing his time with me as I built out the model. I would share it with him and go through it, and he would, poo-poo my ideas and tell me why it wouldn't work, and then I'd refine it and play again. And he was my devil's advocate, and he really, really helped me to get to a model that we have today that's working very well. So we started out with a much lower cap on the loan size and a different payout schedule. And, it's really evolved over time, largely due to him. And today we've got, close to 100 law firms that we work with around the country. So.
And so how do you, I know one of the challenges of any institution that effectively gives out loans is determining creditworthiness. Are they going to pay you back? When are they going to pay you back? Obviously, a typical proxy for that is one's credit score. How do you, I know on your website and obviously just thinking about it more generally, you have to look at something else. I mean, you have to look at something, right, to determine whether or not to give this person lend them the money, how much, et cetera. How do you, I'm assuming it's proprietary to an extent, but maybe at a high level, what are some of the things that you can look at to make this possible?
Right. Well, let me step back for just a second. At NOW Account, we kind of had the same issue, right? A FICO score for the owner of a business is really not indicative of the business's credit, right? That's kind of what people use sometimes, or D&B, which is self-reported. But we had to figure out a way to do that in my previous company, because while you think that the customer is the biggest piece of the risk, the bigger piece of risk for us was that small supplier. If the widgets were broken, would they be able to replace the widgets and stay in business, and honor that rescinding the product? And so what we came upon was something called the Small Business Financial Exchange, the SBFE, which Equifax and others were working together with a group to build a model similar to a FICO score on a small business. So fast forward to BYDcash, of course, our clients don't have a social security number. They don't have a credit score in the US. So we thought, we're either really smart or really crazy, but we're going to try this and we're going to test. And again, I am so fortunate to have the co-founders that I have. I had one of my co-founders and board members has sold into the legal field for 30 years and is now a billionaire. And he is my private lender. So we were able to use his money to test. And what we've done is we have a proprietary way that we get the information from the clients, but some of that might be around their living expenses and their rent or mortgage or what have you. It might be a handwritten note that says, I pay so-and-so $500 a month for my room and board. So there's a lot of different things that we look at. And it is proprietary. I can't really get into too much, but that's the secret sauce. But what we found is that we modeled this for an 8% default rate with our hope of sticking to 8%. What we found is we're less than half of that. Wow. So we're really around 2%. We had a little bit more in the beginning, but that was really on us. We didn't have all of our processes in place. And we were so busy signing people up, we weren't really thinking about collecting the payments as much. So, but today it's really less than 2%. And a lot of that has to do with the way that we go to market. Our idea is these are very good, valuable people that this is really their first step in the financial journey in the US. And so we want to help them through that process. Many of them come from countries where they don't trust the banking system. They're not eligible or able to get a loan from someone. They're afraid of credit. And so it's really our people that help them through the process. We are very hands-on, very service-oriented, answering their questions, helping guide them, and collecting. There's a lot of data that we do collect, but helping them to understand how it works. And that's really what's made us successful in signing these folks up. And again, this is something, immigration is so important and vital to their life and their family's life. And so they're not, by and large, going to mess with that, right? They're really, it's important to them.
Yeah. So they're incentivized to make this work.
Right.
I mean, in the long term, unless they're really short term thinking, right, or something, God forbid, awful happens.
Right. And that does happen, right?
Sure.
And that's always going to happen. If you're a lender, you're going to have some defaults.
Right.
But these folks, we've got people that are on their second, third, fourth loan with us now. So they're really looking at where it's going. And we're really thinking, our big picture goal is to not just be this loan, but help get them into, the financial system, financial inclusion. And we will bring additional products and services, whether it's from us or through partners, to help get them there. When we started, I did the underwriting myself. And I dug through every bank statement, every bill, and you see where whether it's intentional or not, they are overpaying, right, on a lot of things. There's a lot of fees that they incur that you and I don't incur. Even cell phone bills. Cell phone bills often were 3-4 times what I would pay. And it may be that they just don't know how to negotiate, or it may be someone taking advantage of it. But really looking at those places, how can we, down the road, bring additional products and services to really help them grow in the financial system in the US. So that's been our big picture. And part of this is really demonstrating the creditworthiness of this market to other providers, so that they do have more options.
I love this, because I feel like not only do you have the potential to help them with their immigration journey, but you can actually build the trust that they may not have, by not just saying, here's money for your immigration, but also saying, hey, here's some things you can do for your other bills to lower them, and save some extra money. And, that sort of goes above and beyond what your business says it does today, but perhaps can build a really strong relationship between you and this client, down the road.
Yeah, I mean, what we found is there are, and again, we have to walk before we run, but there are a number of ways, if we can help them save that money, that pays for their immigration, right? I mean, if we were to save a couple $100 a month, that's going to help them pay for their case. And so that's what we're looking to do, but also help set them up for a better life, which is why they're here.
Question for you, in terms of, a lot of folks who listen to the show are immigration lawyers, or work at an immigration law firm. What's your kind of, for lack of a better word, pitch to them, right? Like, obviously, they're not going to be using your services. Is the idea to say, hey, we want to be on your radar, so when you come across a client that says, hey, I need your services, but I can't afford it right now, for you to, instead of working on your own payment plan, which, by the way, a lot of law firms try to do, they get paid, the lawyer gets paid up front, and then they connect you with, or they connect their client with you. Would that be sort of the value proposition, if you will, to the immigration attorneys that may be listening to this?
Right. So what we do is we have an agreement with the law firm, because what they will do is they can completely outsource their payment plan to us, or they can offer a payment plan. It's up to them. They choose how they want to do it, but they can sign an agreement with us, and they send over the clients that they want to send over. They decide who they want to send to us. We help get the loan approved for the client, and we cover both the attorney's fees and the filing fees. The biggest value to the law firm, as well as to the client, is the law firm gets paid 100% upfront for the legal fees, which means they can start and complete that case as quickly as they're able to. And then the filing fees, they know that there are good filing fees ready to go when they're ready to file. Most of the law firms that I've talked to either offer a payment plan, but it's a large deposit up front and then maybe a set amount every month, or they may do a lower amount, but I'm not going to file the case until I've been paid in full. And that can, we've even seen times where it's drawn so long that now maybe we've got to go back and redo something, and now there's a new expense for because something's expired, or I've paid the attorney's fees, but now I can't pull together the filing fees, or whatever the case may be. So while a law firm is offering a payment plan that does not charge interest, ours does charge interest, but they're able to complete their case more quickly, which presumably is going to help them get into a better financial position more quickly as well, or whatever the case may be. So it's helping them to achieve that goal faster.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And again, like I said, understanding the nuances of, how important timing is. To your point, what if something expires by the time the individual is able to, then they have to pay, they have to wait longer to get a new document or a new medical form or whatnot, or a fee. I mean, we just had pretty crazy fee increases, we continue to have them. A fee increase, was instated, and now suddenly it's twice as much as what you thought it was. And that prolongs your process even more. And, those things could be, they could be, in the best case scenario, a nuisance. Worst case scenario, they can devastate a case.
Right.
It's not, and I think all lawyers, immigration lawyers, care deeply about their work and care deeply about their clients, but it's not their responsibility to make sure that the client is able to make this done on purpose. They're not a charity.
Right.
And so it's just this sort of between a rock and a hard place type of thing. And so I really appreciate that you not only sort of have this benefit, but that you understand the value of it, especially in the edge cases, which can, change someone's life completely.
Yeah.
For the worse or for the better.
Yeah. I've talked to, I think the law firms, certainly the law firms we work with, really care about their clients. That's why they're there. And some of the law firms I've talked to said, sometimes they pay or they don't pay, but we're not a charity. I'm like, well, you kind of are, because you're not getting paid for a lot of these cases, right? But they want to serve those clients, and we want to help them serve those clients. And we too want to provide value to the client, because it's not just this, it's their whole life, right? So how do we help them really learn about the financial system? So one of the things that we do to try to make this easier is we allow the client to choose the term. So the law firm's going to get paid up front, and we're going to have the filing fees ready to go. As soon as they're ready to file, they notice us and we send the filing fees. The client can choose their payment terms between 6 months and 60 months. They can have up to 5 years. That a 5-year loan is an expensive loan. But the idea behind this is, while they're going through the process, we want to let them have the lowest monthly payment, so that they can afford to do this and move forward. We're using these loans to help them build credit in the US. So we want to make sure that they're able to make those payments. And that's why we have a minimum 6 months. We want to show a positive payment history for them. So it may be, right now I need a $200 a month payment. But once they get to a point where they're able to pay it off faster, we work with them to think of ways to do that, so that they can save that cost over time. They meet their immediate need, and then they reduce the overall cost of the loan. And so that's what we're really trying to do, to help them get through the process and get through their own petition more quickly.
Yeah. And then, of course, there are often multiple steps. So for you as a business, they're a repeat customer at least a couple times. And then from their perspective, even a 5-year term, if they're moving here and the hope is that they make this place their home, 5 years is a drop in the bucket in terms of your, an average lifespan, right? Obviously, again, depending on their age, but if you're even your 30s, 40s, you have more than enough time to make that money back. Hopefully, once you come here, you become, you legalize your status, you get your work authorization, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess as a kind of a final question, where, it feels like BYDcash is doing something very specific and really important. Where do you see the business going or growing, if in the moment, at the moment, beyond sort of loans with, to folks who in the immigration space? I mean, some things you mentioned are helping them with other aspects of their sort of financial literacy. Could it be something like that? Could it be, like, what are your guys' thoughts in terms of the future for the company?
Well, first and foremost, it's a huge industry and we
Yeah.
barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a long way to go just with what we're doing today. But for us, a lot of our clients it's humanitarian, it's family. We're now getting more into the employment side. So today we're doing more EB1, 2, 3, the elite athletes, and we've got an actor from, the most Emmy award-winning show. And, our clients run the gamut just like they do for the law firms, right? But we are looking at, moving into more employment areas. And then also looking at some of those other products through partners today. A lower cost remittance. A lot of people are sending money home. And it can be very expensive. And we have, through a partnership, we can reduce that cost significantly and make it easier. So we're working on our app, which will offer different products through that are on the client's phone. The app will allow them all the information, the documents that we collect will be stored there, so they have easy access to get to those documents. And then again, we'll start to really build out this credit score for them. So there are a lot that, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are a lot of shiny objects, right? But we're trying to stay pretty focused right now because it really is a huge market. There's a lot of opportunity here, and we have a very high service level. We have 5-star reviews from our clients and our partners. And as we grow, we want to keep it that way. So that's our primary focus for now. Down the road, we are going to offer additional products and services or partner to do that. But really, we're focused right now.
Yeah, that's great. And, when dealing with immigration, I think it's important to focus on a 5-star process or service, because the last thing anyone wants to do with respect to anything in the immigration process is screw it up.
Right.
So
Right.
I love that. So I guess as a final question, what do you think? I mean, and you have so much entrepreneurial experience, what do you think is the thing right now, in this moment where you are right now, where the business is right now? What's the prevailing kind of advice that you're taking? Maybe it's from your past experiences, maybe it's from mentors or others, partners. Like, what's the advice that every day you're like, okay, this is what we're following in the moment?
Well, I am really fortunate in having an exceptional board. So as I mentioned, one of my partners founded a company called DTI. They do all the back office or outsourced work for law firms. So he's really great about how to work with law firms, what their challenges are, what their needs are. So we're really trying very hard to address it, even though they're not our client per se, they don't pay us, but we want to make sure that working with us is easy and valuable to them. Then I have a gentleman who built and ran Equifax International. He's helping me on the credit side, thinking through the data we collect, how we collect it, how we're building out that scoring model for our clients, because as a lender, that is, key, right? That's very important. And then I have another gentleman by the name of Ojalan Almeida who ran Western Union International, their money transfer business. And then he was president of and CEO of ACI, one of the largest payments companies in the world. He's helping me look at additional products and services to offer our client base. He actually is Brazilian and on the board of the largest bank in Brazil. So he's really helping me look through things like that. So, I've had surround yourself with really smart people, because you're never going to know everything, and they don't know everything either, but they all bring some really, really valuable information and skills to the table. So that would be kind of my piece of advice.
That's great advice. And it's clearly something you're actively kind of listening to or implementing right now. I love that. Well, Kim, thank you. This has been so interesting. I feel like we could probably talk for another hour and get more learnings from all of your experiences. But thank you so much for your time and for everything you're working on. It was great to see you at the conference in Chicago, and I'm assuming that you'll be at more immigration law conferences going forward. For folks who are listening, BYDcash.com is the website. Right. So definitely check that out. And to the immigration lawyers, please check out the link in the show notes for the company. Hey, Kim, I hope they go and follow you and connect with you on LinkedIn and, stay in touch. Obviously, reach out if they'd like to partner with you and offer your services. So again, thank you so much for being here. This was really awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. So interesting. I feel like I just went through a whole documentary about sort of the whole fintech startup world and where it is today. It's so cool. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you all kind of learned something or had some amazing takeaways from this episode. I think to me, wow, thinking about the rapid growth and of startups back in the early 2000s, it's so different from how it is now in a way. But on the other hand, it's sort of the same idea of finding challenges and solving them through technology or through new services. So for those who are building your own startups in the industry, keep going, keep doing it, and solve your problems, and the business will come. The money will come as long as you keep doing great work. Thank you again to Lex Reception for sponsoring this episode. Just if you missed it in the beginning, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service, and they provide immigration law firms with a team that will, answer phone calls, answer emails, etc., from prospective clients who have questions, but then also reach out to somebody who's inquired about your firm or your business. I actually saw Lex Reception shared a social media post the other day that said that one of their clients had someone reach out over the weekend when the firm was closed, but Lex Reception was sort of open, right, working, and that client had like some emergency, and then they ended up because Lex Reception got back to them so quickly, they ended up hiring that firm for this work. Whereas they, if the firm didn't respond, they would have gone to somebody else. So it's really crucial to have somebody, the faster they respond to a prospective client, the better. So Lex Reception will help you do that. If you sign up with them today, listening to, through the link through the show, you get $250 off your first month. So check them out, lexreception.com, or use the link in the show notes. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Amazing episode. See you all next week. And for the meantime, have a great weekend and peace out.